This is Srimad Bhagavatam 10.80.5. Sutta Uvacha Vishnuraten Samprushto Bhagavan Badarayane Vasudeve Bhagavati Nimagno Hridayo Bravit. So, Vishnuraten Samprushto. Vishnuraten is a name for Parikshit Maharaj, one who was absorbed in Vishnu. So till now, if we consider the first 4 verses, where the 1 to 4 were Parikshit speaking. So when he was asked, here there's a transition verse, and that's why it's spoken by the narrator Sutta Goswami. Vishnuratena Samprushto. He was asked, Bhagavan Badarayane. So Badarayana is the sage Vyasa, and his son is called Badarayani. So the subject was, so this is the transition verse spoken by Sutta Goswami, and from the next verse we will have the speaking by Shukdev Goswami, and Vasudeve Bhagavati, that Supreme Lord Vasudev, who is the Bhagavati, Nimagna Hridayo Bravit. Nimagna Hridayo, that means the heart is absorbed in him. Vasudeve Bhagavati, that Supreme Lord. Nimagna Hridayo, it's a beautiful phrase. Now, Magna is, there is Magna and there is Lina. Lina means to merge, Magna is to be absorbed. Nimagna is to be deeply absorbed. So what is absorbed? It's not just the eyes, it's not just the head, but Nimagna Hridayo, the heart is absorbed in Krishna. So sometimes we might be, if we look at a magnificent temple architecture, if we consider absorption, it could be at different levels. We could have our eyes or our senses absorbed in Krishna, and that is good. So if we hear a very melodious kirtan, now it's the music that we like. So the sound, the sweet sound is what we like. If you look at the temple's architecture, so we may like the music or the architecture, the paintings. You might be awestruck, and the senses are absorbed, and it's connected with Krishna, so it's good. It's absorption in Krishna. Now beyond that, our intelligence can also be absorbed. The intelligence means we find a subject to be fascinating. So we might find philosophy to be absorbing, and that is good if we are absorbed in Krishna that way. But beyond that is our heart, is the soul, the core of our being. And this is where we see Krishna as supremely attractive, Krishna as supremely lovable. So for both these illustrious souls, it is not just an idle intellectual pursuit for them. It is a serious pursuit of the heart. And after Parikshit Maharaj has expressed his eagerness, now Shukdev Goswami will start speaking. Shri Shuka Uvacha Krishnasyasit Sakha Kaschid Brahmano Brahmavittamaha Virakta Indriyatheshu Prashantatma Jitendriyaha. So he's describing here Shri Shuka Uvacha. So he says, I will tell you a story of an associate of Krishna. Now, many of the pastimes of Krishna that are described in the second half of the 10th canto, they are often the sequence, largely in the sequences, sometimes it is chronological. That means one pastime after another is described. So generally from 1 to 40, or at least 1 till 35 is more or less chronological. The Vrindavan pastimes are more or less described chronologically, mostly. And we could say even till 50 also. where the Mathura pastimes are described. But largely from 51 till 90, the sequence is often inspirational. Inspirational means that depending on what inspires Shukdev Goswami at that particular time, that particular pastime will be described. Now, it's not that it's not at all chronological. Some pastimes are definitely chronological. So one event happens and the next event happens after that. But here, Parikshit Maharaj does not ask a specific question. Tell me the next incident in Krishna's life. He just tell me Krishna's glories. So even the question that we saw it's not a linear question. He's not asking for a linear narrative. He's saying, okay, you described one pastime, what happened after that? Sometimes it is like that, but sometimes it is not. Here, it is more of a thematic narrative. Thematic narrative means that the theme is Krishna is glorious, Krishna is wonderful, Krishna is lovable, and it is that Krishna whom we seek. So with that theme in mind, let's see how things move forward. So here is describing the pastime of Sudama. And Krishnasya asid sakha kaschit. There existed. Krishna had a sakha named. He does not mention the name over here. Kaschit, there is a sakha. Brahmano Brahmavittamaha. So the characteristics of Sudama, if you consider now, what are the characteristics that are described over here? So first is this, it's more like an external, is Brahmana. That's the designation that he has in the Varnashram system. Now he's not just a nominal Brahmana, he's a substantial Brahmana. Brahmavittamaha, he's knowledgeable, he's wise. He's not just wise but spiritually wise. So he knows about Brahman as a reality. Virakta indriyartheshu. So he was detached, he was renounced. He was not attached to sense objects. Virakta indriyartheshu, renounced from sense objects. Now the difference between detached and renounced is that renounced is more of an order. Detached is like sannyas ashram. Detached is more of a disposition. So we can say that detached is the more appropriate word over here. But he was, the theme was, he was not into sensual enjoyment. And then prashantatma jitendriya. He was peaceful. And he had conquered his senses. He was sense controlled. So let's look at these attributes to understand the glory of the character. So generally when we want to hear the pastimes of Krishna, we also want to know who are the characters involved in the pastimes. Who is it that Krishna is interacting with? And why is Krishna interacting with that person specifically? So generally speaking, if we consider in our spiritual journey, we have to choose between Krishna and Maya. So we are caught in between, and whom are we going to choose? So here his attraction towards Krishna is conveyed through the word Brahmavittamaha. That's not the only word which will convey it, but he knows Brahman, he knows the spiritual reality, and thus he'll be attracted over here. And his non-attraction towards the other side is conveyed through Virakta indriyartheshu prashantatma jitendriya. Now the remaining three characteristics. So Virakta, Prashanta and Jitendriya. Now we'll look at these three one by one. And what these mean. These qualities correlate in many ways with the qualities of a Brahmana described in the Bhagavad-Gita in the 18th chapter. Shamo damastapah shaucham shantirarjavamev cha. So, normally, if we consider, we are here and say there is some sense object. The sense object can cast a spell on us at multiple levels. The sense objects can sometimes cast a spell and then they can pull us in that direction. The spell cast by the sense object. And if you want to avoid that spell, you want to escape from that spell, what do we need to do? There is a multi-pronged approach to it. If we consider that we have, let's depict this in a different way. The soul is here, then the outermost is what we have, the senses. We're depicting it, and then say there is some attractive sense object. So the senses are there, behind that there is the mind, and behind that there is the buddhi. So Krishna talks about this particular hierarchy in 3.42. Indriyani paranyahur indriyebhya param manah manasastu para buddhe yo buddhe paratastu saha. So we have senses and we have the sense objects. So we have the mind and we have the intelligence. So broadly speaking, now we don't want to get attracted towards the sense objects. Senses are trying to cast a spell on us. They try to cast a spell on us, and then with that spell, we don't want to be caught in the spell. So we can cut off the spell at various levels. So virakta, detached. So that virakta is at the level of the buddhi. That the intelligence has understood and become convinced that, okay, there is nothing of interest in this world, in the sense object specifically. So now the prashanta is for the mind. The mind is peaceful. When the mind is peaceful, then we don't get so agitated by what is happening with the mind. Even when the temptations come in the outer world, and we are prashanta, then the spell does not afflict the mind. And then jitendriya. Jitendriya is basically that the senses may want to go toward the sense objects, but we don't let the senses drag us toward those objects. So in this way, we can stay pure and protected. And this is what is described about him as a disposition, inner disposition. Now we could say virakti can also be associated with the mind. The mind's emotions are fickle. So sometimes we could consider that in a war, if an invader is attacking, sometimes there are multiple defensive walls. So just like a fort can have multiple defensive walls, many walls of defense. So for us, each of these jitendriya, that no matter what happens, that we are not going to let our senses go toward the sense objects. That is one wall of defense. Then prashanta is peaceful. That's another wall of defense. That okay, sometimes our senses, they have a tendency to either see or seek. And jitendriya means see is more associated with the jnanendriyas, the knowledge acquiring senses. And seek is associated more with the karmendriyas. So we try to avoid both. Once we have understood this, We learn to avoid both. Then what happens after that? Once we have understood this, that we need to avoid, this is the first wall of defense. This is the wall 1. The senses are Jitendriya. The second wall of defense is the mind. Now, even if the mind, what we do is, when the mind dwells on something, it gets agitated. We keep the mind peaceful. So now, how does the mind get agitated? There is some tempting thought that comes into the mind. So when some thought comes in, that means I just got a thought. So I remember something popped up in my mind. It could be because of something which I saw externally or something which I remembered internally. But it's like a pop-up that comes in. But then we don't give it. A thought may come in, but we don't give it much thought. That means this is where don't contemplate. Dhyayato. So no contemplation on the tempting objects. We don't give thought to the thoughts that are popping up inside us. By that, so we may or may not be able to stop the pop-ups, but we can stop the contemplation. No contemplation. That is, the mind is peaceful. And the last is that with our intelligence. Intelligence is Prashanta. My senses are, the mind is Prashanta, and we are Virakta Indriyartheshu. The intelligence itself is detached. Now we may say, why attribute the intelligence to detach? This is one analytical framework for us to gain better clarity. Intelligence can be attributed, detachment can be attributed to the mind also. But Krishna also says that Kama is situated in the sense objects. The sense is a sense, not in the sense objects, but in the senses, mind and intelligence. So the 3 hiding places of lust which Krishna talks about, these are 3 hiding places of lust in 3.40. These are the 3 vulnerable points for us. So that's why we're analyzing it in this way. The intelligence is detached means that we are convinced that it's not worth it. So that even if the pop-up comes up, even if the pop-up starts growing, so even if the first wall is breached and with our senses we see something, if the second wall is breached, the second wall falls and the mind starts dwelling on it, the intelligence is convinced that this is not worth it. That whatever pleasure is there, it is not worthwhile. The pleasure is far lesser than the trouble. Even if the senses get excited, even if the mind gets excited, we understand that actually here the senses and sense objects are such that the pleasure is not worth the trouble. So once we understand this, then we can be safe wherever we are. So such is the glory of Parikshit, of Shukadeva Goswami, of Sudama the Brahman.